We've got some interesting stories we're covering today with really fantastic guests. Thank you all for being with me on this Substack Live. I'm really enjoying this platform because I love how smart and engaged you all are and interested in some of the stories that I think are really important to cover. Before we have our first guests on, though, I'm just going to give you guys a quick rundown of some of the stories that we're paying attention to this week at Katie Couric Media. So, we're learning a lot more about that horrific shooting that took place in Manhattan inside an office building in Midtown. So, a gunman carrying an assault rifle. It was so eerie to see him walking across that plaza with the rifle over his shoulder. He killed four people. He critically wounded a fifth before shooting himself. I know that officials have said a motive hasn't been determined, but as you probably know, he left a 3-page note in his pocket and said that he was a former high school football player. And in the note, he urged authorities to do a brain scan on him for CTE, which is a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma that can only be diagnosed after death. Four different shootings occurred on Monday across the U.S. in Atlanta, New York, Reno, and Detroit. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been more than 250 mass shootings in 2025 so far. Hopefully, this will reignite yet another conversation about these assault weapons, weapons of war that really serve no purpose for hunters, even sports shooters. So perhaps this will make people talk about that again. I wanted to also tell you what's happening in Texas, where they're in the midst of a special legislative session. I was trying to talk to James Tallarico, representative in Texas. We had a lot of technical difficulties. We're going to try to talk to him again in the near future. But I wanted to tell you about one of the items on the agenda. It is redrawing the state's congressional maps. Now, typically, this is done every decade to account for changes in the census. And despite Greg Abbott's initial reticence, Donald Trump has been very vocal about wanting to pick up Texas seats in the 2026 midterms because, like most sitting presidents, I'm sure he's very nervous about what's going to happen in the midterms. This afternoon, the GOP led state legislature unveiled a redrawn congressional map that would provide Republicans with five new red leaning districts and pack Democratic voters more tightly into urban districts. Now, this, as I mentioned, was in advance of the midterms when sitting presidents generally take a shellacking, which I think George Bush referred it as once. Now, this could end up backfiring on Republicans by spreading their voters too thin. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on this super important story. And last but not least, you all probably heard or read about this that and I think it's so interesting that French President Macron and his wife Brigitte, how's my French accent? They're suing Candace Owen, the right wing influencer and YouTuber, in a 22 count defamation lawsuit. The lawsuit claims that Owens has endorsed, manufactured, and promoted a series of false statements about the French president and the first lady, his wife, including that Brigitte Macron was born a man and transitioned, and that the couple abused their power to conceal their past. It's nonsense, but it's also very sad to me. Another example of how trans people are being marginalized and criticized and erased. Candace Owens, meanwhile, responded by doubling down on her claim. She called Brigitte Macron a groomer and pedophile on her YouTube channel, said the lawsuit was an obvious and desperate public relations strategy. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so those are the quick headlines. And now we're going to talk to Liz Oyer. She was the head pardon attorney for the DOJ until she was fired for not reinstating Mel Gibson's gun rights because of his history of domestic violence. You cannot make this stuff up, right, you guys? So she's one of the first people I wanted to talk to when I heard about Todd Blanche's meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell as the Epstein saga, rather, continues to dominate the news cycle. So let me see if I can get Liz on here. I've hopefully, even though I'm by myself, I hope I can do this. You guys, thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. Here she is, and I'm inviting her now. Liz lives in Washington, D.C. She had a pretty harrowing story about her firing, but she's here now. Thank you. I can do it. Hey, Liz.
Hey, Katie, it's so good to see you.
So nice to see you too. As I mentioned, you were one of the first people I wanted to reach out to when I heard about this really unusual, dare I say, unprecedented and inappropriate, you can tell me, meeting that the assistant U.S. attorney, assistant attorney general, rather, had with Ghislaine Maxwell at the prison in Tallahassee. So, what was your reaction when you heard about this meeting?
Katie, this is absolutely wild in so many different ways what's going on. To kind of give some background for those who are not lawyers or in the inner workings of the Department of Justice, Todd Blanche is the number two official in the Department of Justice. He's basically the chief operating officer of the whole place. DOJ has over 100,000 employees. The deputy attorney general is someone who would generally be overseeing the operations from a very high level. He's kind of like the air traffic controller of the whole case. These are employees all over the country and all over the world working to keep our country safe, to uphold our civil rights, etc. So, the idea that Todd Blanche personally has gone down to Florida for 2 days to meet with someone who is serving a prison sentence, a 20-year sentence for crimes involving the sexual exploitation of children, is absolutely outstanding. This is not the type of thing that you would expect someone at that level in the department to be involved in. And frankly, Katie, it's really bizarre that anyone from the Department of Justice is going to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell at this point, now that she has been tried and convicted and sentenced to prison.
Well, something smells rotten in Tallahassee. I think, you can take that to the bank, but we can only speculate. He was there for 2 days. Donald Trump, I know shortly after that meeting said, uh, I'm allowed to do it. It's not it's it but it's something I haven't thought about, which obviously left the door wide open. So, I mean, take us through what is going on, and I know that they've discussed, I think, 100 she answered questions about 100 people. Todd Blanche hasn't released any details, but her lawyer told reporters that she answered questions about 100 people. I mean, you were in the DOJ for a long time, Liz. And I know this is pure speculation, by the way, but can you put two and two together here?
Yeah, it seems very clear that they're trying to cut a deal. This administration's go to move when they're trying to solve a political crisis is the quid pro quo, to make some sort of exchange or bargain. And in this case, it seems like Todd Blanche has been sent to Florida to see if there is a deal that can be reached with Ghislaine Maxwell that will solve this political crisis for the president. There are a couple of details about this that are extremely fishy. One is Todd Blanche's personal involvement. He, as you know, was President Trump's personal lawyer in the New York hush money case. And he is somebody who is deeply trusted by Trump because he has Trump's interests first and foremost. So the fact that
Right.
he's down there personally suggests that he is looking for a way to solve a problem for Donald Trump, not representing the Department of Justice and the people of the United States. Two is that Ghislaine Maxwell suddenly has a new attorney who popped onto this case just days before Blanche went to meet with her. His name
No,
is
I didn't
David
know about
Marcus.
this attorney, Liz, who this attorney is.
Yeah, I mean he's a very good criminal defense attorney, and he's also a friend of Todd Blanche, and that doesn't seem to be a coincidence. Maxwell had attorneys who've been representing her in her appeal to the Supreme Court, and suddenly this new attorney comes on the scene and enters his appearance in the case. I believe it was just 2 days before Blanche went down to Florida to meet with Maxwell, so that raises some questions. And then another really mysterious piece of this is The most knowledgeable person in the Justice Department about any given case is always the lead prosecutor, the person who actually tries the case. In the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, there was an experienced assistant United States attorney who tried her case, convicted her, presided over her sentencing, who undoubtedly knows more about this case than anyone. That was Maureen Comey, who was fired by the Justice Department just about a week before this whole thing unfolded. So this is speculation, Katie, but in my view, it looks like they're trying to get the person who's knowledgeable about the facts out of the way and then strike some sort of corrupt bargain to try to solve a problem for Donald Trump.
But I guess I'm trying, maybe I just don't have a legal brain, Liz, but I'm trying to figure out what would this corrupt bargain be? I mean, clearly, I think it's obvious that Donald Trump's name is mentioned multiple times, right? We know that. That is public, right? Along with some other high profile people, or at least that was reported in the Wall Street Journal, I should say. Um, so what would this bargain or deal look like? Would it be uh well, first of all, what would she get from it? Because I know that James Comer, who's the House Oversight Chair, Republican from Kentucky, subpoenaed Maxwell to testify
Yeah.
next month on Capitol Hill. And her team responded with a list of conditions. Let me just read these conditions, Liz, and then you can tell us sort of what the quid pro quo might be. A grant of formal immunity, that the interview be conducted outside of the jail where she's serving her sentence, the committee's questions in advance, and that the interview be scheduled only after the resolution of her Supreme Court petition and her forthcoming habeas petition. So tell us what that tells you.
She's been pretty transparent through her lawyer about one thing, which is the fact that she is seeking some relief from the 20-year prison sentence that she's currently serving. So, from her perspective, that's the objective, is to find a way out from under the sentence. From Donald Trump's perspective, I believe that there are two possible scenarios. One would be that she says something that exonerates him, that says Donald Trump had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein's illegal activities. And the other is that she could point the finger elsewhere and implicate someone else who's one of Donald Trump's political rivals, one of the many people that he does not like. So those are sort of two possible scenarios in terms of how she could help here. There are a couple of ways that the Department of Justice could grant her the relief that she is seeking. One is to ask the court to reduce her sentence. That, of course, would be up to the judge presiding over the case. So that's not a sure thing. But the Department of Justice, under Blanche's leadership, could go to the court and say, we want to reduce her sentence. The surest way to do it, however, would
Exchange,
be
sorry, in exchange for her cooperation, reducing her sentence.
right. That's something that, it does happen in sort of ordinary cases. It doesn't generally happen in cases like this. But that's one possibility. But again, that would be up to the court. So the other way to do it would be to get Donald Trump to grant her a pardon or a commutation of her sentence, which would be a reduction of the sentence that the president could make without the court's involvement. And that seems to be what Maxwell is really angling for here.
A pardon.
Yes.
And so basically, she can say on the record publicly whatever they are asking her to say, whether it's true or not.
The fact that they're even talking to her suggests that they don't really care too much about the truth of the matter. Ghislaine Maxwell is someone who the Department of Justice has already said in public filings is not credible. When she was sentenced, there was a lengthy, detailed memo filed by Maureen Comey and her colleagues saying this is not someone who is credible or trustworthy. She has lied in court proceedings previously. They made it clear that she's not someone who's trusted. So now they've pushed out of the way the most knowledgeable person, and Todd Blanche is meeting with this person who is conspicuously trying to get out from under a lengthy prison sentence, which is really shocking because she's not somebody that we could possibly determine is credible or believable at this point, given what she personally has at stake.
Well, why don't you give a little background on Ghislaine Maxwell and the role she played and what she was convicted of. And by the way, this sounds so insane to me, Liz. This whole thing that they could basically use their power, get her to lie about Donald Trump's association with Jeffrey Epstein, implicate either falsely or maybe truthfully other people, and they think that the public is going to buy it. Well, I guess that's a good question for you. What do you think the reaction would be if she spills the beans, points fingers at other people, and gets pardoned and released from prison?
I don't really see a good way out of this for Donald Trump through Ghislaine Maxwell, Katie. We have to keep in mind that she was convicted of extremely serious crimes. She is not a witness or a minor participant. She is somebody who conspired with Jeffrey Epstein to engage in the sex trafficking of children. She recruited these young women, girls. She abused them herself, according to multiple of the victims. She was convicted of extremely serious crimes. There are people, even on the Republican side, allies of Trump, who have expressed the view that 20 years is not a sufficient sentence for her crimes. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said over the weekend that he believes she should have gotten a life sentence given the severity of the crimes that she has committed. And what we have totally lost sight of here, not we, what the Department of Justice and the president have totally lost sight of here, are the victims, the people who were actually harmed, seriously harmed by Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Those people do not appear to have been consulted at all by the Justice Department in this process. And one can only imagine that it would be unbearably traumatizing and upsetting for them to see Ghislaine Maxwell pardoned or to see her sentence reduced after all that they have gone through. So it's very difficult to see, Katie, what the good outcome would be here at this point that would actually solve this problem.
Yeah, and how is this simultaneously taking place as her case works its way to the Supreme Court? Would all of this knock that off the agenda?
If she were pardoned by the president, it would moot her appeal to the Supreme Court. Essentially, there would be no need for the Supreme Court to resolve her appeal. I think from a legal perspective, it's unlikely that the Supreme Court will want to take this case. They have the discretion to grant or deny review of cases. And my guess, based on my legal experience, is that they will not touch this case. And if she gets a pardon, they won't need to touch the case.
Um, well, let's go back and talk about this whole quote unquote arrangement, right? Or negotiating process that we're kind of witnessing happening in real time. Um, how quickly could this happen? And I know that the law is your area of expertise, but you've seen sort of MAGA, many parts of MAGA really upset about the fact that the DOJ didn't release all this information. What is the time frame, and what do you think might be? And I'm talking to Susan Glasser later from the New Yorker, but what do you expect the political ramifications would be if they cut a deal with this woman?
I don't think it's going to satisfy the people in the MAGA base who really just want to see the Epstein files. All of this discussion with Maxwell and even getting her involved in the first place seems to be a way to divert the focus away from the files themselves. We need to remember that the Justice Department and the FBI have been investigating Epstein and Maxwell for about 20 years now. So they have amassed a huge amount of information in their files. And what the MAGA base wants is to see the files. And those files still have not been released in large part to the public. So it seems unlikely that anything that Maxwell might contribute to the conversation is going to satisfy that demand to see the Epstein files.
Do you know Maureen Comey?
I don't know her personally, no, but she had an excellent reputation in the department as an upstanding and skilled prosecutor.
And they just sort of unceremoniously fired her, I guess, to get her out of the way. As far as I know, she hasn't spoken out about this yet, has she?
Not that I've heard, Katie. A lot of folks who have been sidelined from important positions in the Justice Department haven't spoken out about what happened. I hope that she may decide to do that at some point, but she hasn't yet.
I hope she does too, because as you said, she knows more about this case than anyone.
Yep.
She must have a lot of information about what would be in these so-called files. Is that correct?
Certainly, she has more information than anyone. And so, if the goal really were to get to the bottom of what does Ghislaine Maxwell know, how could she help here, you'd want to rely on Maureen Comey to point in the right direction. You'd want Maureen Comey in the room during that interview so that she could say, is this credible or not? Is what Maxwell is saying something that matches with the evidence in the files? I am certain that Todd Blanche has not reviewed all of the evidence in detail in this case. He couldn't possibly have the time or the bandwidth to do that. So typically, you'd expect that he'd want Maureen Comey by his side, or he'd want Maureen Comey to handle the interview on her own without him involved or with an FBI agent sitting by her side. So the fact that they've unceremoniously removed her from her post raises a lot of questions and red flags.
Yeah, why wouldn't she speak out? Do you think that, well, first of all, everybody knows she's James Comey. Well, if you didn't know, the former FBI director's daughter, which makes it even more complicated, I think, in some ways, Liz. But
Definitely.
what would happen to her if she did speak out about this? And I hope she does.
Well, the Justice Department has been very vindictive. They take actions of retaliation against employees that speak out about the circumstances of their firings, people who speak out about the corruption that is happening now within the Department of Justice. And I think people are fearful for their careers. They're fearful of exposing themselves and bringing a lot of attention to themselves that's unwanted. I am hopeful that more people will decide to start speaking out because there are so many awful corrupt things happening within the Justice Department right now. We've seen a couple of whistleblowers come forward to talk about some of those things, and my hope is that that will continue to inspire others to speak out.
Can you organize some group, Liz? You've been very courageous. Almost immediately after your firing, you did an interview with me. Is there any
Yeah.
way that you can form some kind of group of people who would have a very powerful testimony and talking about this, and maybe even, I don't know, testifying on Capitol Hill? I don't know if it would do anything given the current composition of the House and Senate, but is there anything that can stop this?
Well, there is a group that has formed by some former DOJ employees called the Justice Connection, which is providing support and resources for Department of Justice employees who've been fired or placed on leave or reassigned. And that group is doing really excellent, important work. In terms of speaking out publicly, it's something that I've tried to encourage my colleagues to do. It's really important that we lend our voices to this conversation now. But the retaliation is real. In my case, Katie, I actually was invited to testify on the Hill before Democratic members of the House and Senate Judiciary Committees about the circumstances of my firing. And that was scheduled to take place on a Monday. The Friday before I was scheduled to testify, I was actually, I was at the Kennedy Center with my parents and my husband. And I was leaving there at about 9:15 at night, and I got a phone call from someone at the Department of Justice who was not supposed to be calling me, was just calling me because he was a very decent person who was disturbed by something he learned. And he told me that there were two armed special deputy U.S. Marshals on their way to my home to deliver me a letter. The letter was a warning about testifying before members of Congress. And he told me these officers were scheduled to arrive at my home at about 10 o'clock that night. And he told me that he just felt that he had to call me to let me know because he knew that it would be very upsetting to my family to see these armed men show up at my door at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. And Katie, my heart stopped. I've never felt that fear before. And my teenager, was home alone at that time. And I told this very decent man that my child was home alone and it would be really just unspeakably upsetting for him um, to receive these visitors. And this person was able to work to call them off and turn them around so that they did not show up at my doorstep at 10 o'clock at night.
And I forget what happened, Liz. Did you end up testifying? I can't remember. You did, right?
I did, Katie. Yeah, I mean, at that point, I was the intimidation tactics. They have the intended effect. It's very scary to see yourself on the other side of the law enforcement resources of the Justice Department. But I was also determined at that point to go forward with my testimony because I didn't want to set the precedent that these intimidation tactics could be effective in silencing people. And I'm hoping that others will find that courage and speak up about what's going on there because we are on a very frightening slide toward authoritarianism. And the Department of Justice is intended to be one of the important safeguards for the rule of law. And it is just not functioning that way at the current moment.
In fact, you wrote in a recent Substack post, I cannot imagine that anyone who ever worked in the Department of Justice fails to see that generational damage is being done by its current leadership. Institutional safeguards have been systematically dismantled. Schools of justice are being ransacked for political gain. The legitimacy and credibility of the institution are diminishing before our eyes. Um, it just seems so insane that nothing can be done, that we have to watch helplessly as these safeguards, as you said, are dismantled.
My hope is that some of the litigation that's going on now will be successful in restoring some order. I am appealing my firing. My firing from the department was clearly in violation of longstanding civil service protections for non political employees. And there are many others who are pursuing appeals of their terminations. And my hope is that those will be resolved in a way that makes it harder for the Department of Justice to oust all the career experts and replace them with political loyalists. So we'll see what
Lapdogs.
happens
I
there.
would say, yeah, lapdogs, basically, not even loyalists. And, my producers had a good question. And before we go, I wanted to ask you, like, this far right manosphere, these commentators are starting to paint Ghislaine, sorry, I never say her name right, Ghislaine Maxwell, as a potential victim. Benny Johnson, host of a pro Trump podcast, said in response to the DOJ's interviewing Maxwell, this is what transparency looks like. Epstein's former lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, who's really, anyway, called her the Rosetta Stone on Fox News, and Greg Kelly on Newsmax went as far to say that Maxwell just might be a victim. What do you think of this sort of, painting this woman in this kind of positive light, or at least a different light than she's previously been painted?
That's a shocking counter narrative that really just is it's insulting to the actual victims of her crimes and Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. I have to imagine that that comparison really feels degrading and inappropriate to them. And I want to remind folks that the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, it began under Trump 1. Trump's Justice Department decided that he and she were people who were worthy of federal prosecution on very serious charges. So anything that is said to paint her differently at this point in time is really just a false revision of history.
Yeah, before we go, since people sort of are joining this in progress, I'm just going to ask you, which I think is the crux of this conversation. What is the Justice Department looking for, and what is Ghislaine Maxwell looking for before we go? I didn't get a chance to ask you about Emile Bovee. It's Bovee, not Beauvais, right?
I've heard both, but I think Bovie is correct.
Bovee, and then I'll end on that other question. But he's Trump's former lawyer. He was confirmed for a lifetime appointment as a federal appeals court judge. Uh, how dangerous is that, Liz?
Emile Bovie has done some of the dirtiest of dirty work for the Trump administration during the early months. He is someone who presided over the firings of everybody who was involved in the special counsel investigation. He cut the deal with the New York City mayor, Eric Adams, that got him out from under serious criminal charges. He is the one who made sure that Donald Trump's deportation flights took off without a hitch, despite court orders that said that they should not. So he he was a soldier for this cause, and now he is being rewarded for his loyalty with a lifetime appointment to a federal appellate court judgeship. Many people think that this may be a stepping stone to an appointment to the Supreme Court. And it's really just illustrative of how the Trump DOJ works. You serve loyalty, you don't ask questions, you execute orders, and you will be rewarded.
Okay, gosh, and finally, going back to my second to the last question, just what the Trump administration or Todd Blanche and now Ghislaine Maxwell's new lawyer might be up to in terms, in your view, and what these conversations, the suggestion of a potential pardon by Trump himself, what do you think's going on? Just for people who weren't here at the beginning of this conversation.
The Trump administration is trying to solve a political problem with a quid pro quo. They're trying to cut a deal with Ghislaine Maxwell that will help the president resolve this political crisis that the Epstein case has become for him personally. So they have sent Trump's former personal attorney, Todd Blanche, who's the number 2 official at the Justice Department, to try to cut a deal of some sort with Ghislaine Maxwell. She has made it clear that she is seeking to get out from under her 20-year prison sentence. She would like to receive a pardon from the president or a reduction in her sentence. And from Trump's perspective, I believe they're still fishing to figure out what might help them solve this problem, but there are really 2 possibilities. She could exonerate Donald Trump by saying that Donald Trump had no knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's illegal activities, or she could implicate other people who are political enemies of Donald Trump and help him point the finger in a different direction. It seems like they are trying to strike some sort of bargain. I'm not sure that any bargain they reach will satisfy any of the many people who are now closely watching this case, but that seems to be what Todd Blanche is trying to do.
Liz Oyer, Liz, always great to see you. You help us understand complicated legal issues in such a really, comprehensive and comprehensible way. So, Liz, thank you so much, and you're doing a great job on social media unpacking all these issues. I know it's hard to keep up with all of them, but really appreciate what you're doing to inform the American people. It's so helpful and so critically important.
Thanks, Katie. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. And I'll be sharing more about this on my social medias as well. Folks can
Yeah,
follow me at
follow.
Lawyer Oyer on Substack, on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm on all the platforms as Lawyer Oyer.
Okay, it's wonderful. And now we're going to talk to Nick Kristof about what's happening globally and with USAID. So thanks
Thanks,
again.
Katie.
All
Bye.
right. I'll try to make Nick appear, everyone. Okay, here we go. Again, I appreciate your patience. And I know it's up, it's Kristof Farms. He's got a new address. Hold on, I'm getting there. My team is like holding their breath, making sure that I know what I'm doing. Kristof, Kristof Farms. Okay, hold on, everyone. Sorry about this. Nick Kristof is an amazing journalist, and hopefully I did this right. Fingers crossed, everybody. He's obviously an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. He writes about foreign policy and domestic issues. He's won 2 Pulitzers, one for his coverage of Tiananmen Square and another for his coverage of the Darfur genocide. And I can't believe it, Nick. Wonders never cease. I actually was able to get you to join. How are you, Nick? First and
I,
foremost.
I'm well. Greetings. It's good to see you. I wish we were in person in the same place.
I know, me too. Well, hopefully after the summer's over. You and I have been talking, you've been traveling. I've really wanted to talk with you, Nick, about so many of these issues. I know you went on a big trip. I wanted to talk to you about USAID and the impact of all those cuts and the importance of soft power. But first, let me ask you about this On the Farm Substack account because you're in Oregon right now and you just started this Substack. What are you doing in Oregon?
So I'm on the family farm, and it's good. I'm happy to talk about all the other tragedies in the world, Katie, but it's nice to talk about something a little bit positive. So I'm on the family farm where I grew up. I represent no upward mobility. I'm in the house where I grew up, and historically, it had been a cherry orchard. And then in 2018, my wife Cheryl, who you know, Cheryl and I pulled out the cherry orchard and planted half wine grapes and half cider apples. And this is our distraction from all the chaos and craziness of the world to try to make, first-rate Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and hard cider.
Well, I'd love to come visit you because I know they make excellent wine in Oregon, and I'm sure you need a respite from all the things that you cover and do so well to help us understand what's happening globally. And I wanted to talk to you about USAID, but I feel like I need to start with Gaza, Nick.
Sure.
World Food Program, that's an arm of the UN, said this week that the hunger crisis in Gaza had reached, quote, new and astonishing levels of desperation, with a third of the population not eating for multiple days in a row. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is run by Hamas, the total number of deaths from hunger is now 147, and at least 88 of those have been children. Can you help us understand what's happening in Gaza and why things have sort of reached, it seems to me, from everything I'm reading and watching, a tipping point?
I mean, it's horrifying in every respect. I've covered hunger crises around the world, but what particularly hits me, Katie, is this is one that the U.S. is very much complicit in. This is a hunger crisis that we have helped foster in both the Biden administration and Trump administration and have not used our leverage to try to address. There are, you know, look, every year you have somewhere around 2 million kids a year who die of malnutrition. Hunger is a global problem. More kids are probably dying in Sudan than in Gaza, but this is one that we have helped create. This is one that was predicted. Every aid organization was warning that famine was approaching. And yet the blockade continued. Food did not go in. There were not provisions to distribute it adequately. And then Israel tried this alternative mechanism, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which everybody warned was going to be a disaster. And indeed, not only are people continuing to starve, but we've had reportedly about 1,000 people who have been killed while trying to get food. Um, and, this is the world should be ashamed that it has allowed this to happen in front of us. Usually famines happen in remote parts of Ethiopia. There's a hunger crisis right now among the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, but, leaders can say, "Oh, we don't know about that." They can't say we don't know about Gaza. This is happening on our watch, on television, and we're allowing it to continue.
Nick, as you know, and Donald Trump recently repeated this claim that the food aid is being stolen by Hamas, and multiple outlets have debunked that claim. What are some of the obstacles that are actually preventing aid from getting to the Palestinians? Because it's a whole confluence of events, is it not?
Sure, sure, and look, I mean, I don't doubt that there are some Hamas fighters who are stealing aid. I mean, I think anybody is trying to steal aid for themselves, for their families. And if some Hamas fighters have guns, I'm sure they're doing some. But it certainly does not seem that that is happening systematically. So one problem is that Israel has, in general, been reluctant to allow enough food into Gaza. But a second problem is that even when food gets into Gaza, there's a problem of getting trucks to where people are and allowing them to go safely. And so for a while, early in the war, you had Gaza. You had the police force in Gaza who were escorting trucks and providing security. And
The
Israel
police
regarded the
force,
police.
the police force meaning Israeli people,
No, 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 no. This was the Gaza police force, and
not the IDF, not
not the
soldiers.
IDF. No, no, no. This was the Gazan police, but Israel regarded the Gazan police as a branch of Hamas, which, I mean, it kind of is, but it's also different from Hamas fighters. But the upshot is that then Israel began bombing and striking and killing the civilian police who were escorting the trucks. So naturally, the police stopped doing that. And Israel also then began arming some um, alternative clans in Gaza as an opposition to Hamas. But those were kind of gangsters, and then they began attacking the convoys as well. So you have a real lack of security. Some of the trucks have been also struck by the IDF in mysterious circumstances, and so you have a real problem with security. And um, you know, is the UN bureaucratic at times? Absolutely. But as an occupying power, Israel has the responsibility in international law to make sure people get fed. And instead of facilitating that process, it has been impeding it.
What do you think can be done or will be done, Nick, to prevent this crisis from becoming even, I mean, worse?
And I think it may well get worse. I mean, the human body, when I've repeatedly seen around the world that when you get people at this tipping point, as you referred to it at the beginning of our conversation, uh, kids especially are on edge. They don't have reserves of fat and protein and carbohydrate, and the body very quickly goes downhill. And so, the idea of airdrops, which have been happening recently, you know, I mean, that's certainly better than nothing. Although, last year there were 5 people who were actually killed by airdrops in Gaza. But in general, that will get some food in, but it's not nearly enough. And there are hundreds of trucks right around the perimeter waiting to go in. And so essentially what needs to happen is the UN and NGOs have to be given the authority again to bring trucks across without onerous inspections and to be able to they have a ceasefire so that they can actually deliver that food, not just in 1, 2, or 3 locations around Gaza, but 2 places where people actually are. When people are really weak, they can't hike 15 miles to get to a food distribution. Um, and, I mean, the aid workers there are just heroic, and many of them have
They're
been
all
killed.
they're also really, malnourished now at this point, right?
Absolutely, as are the health workers. The nurses have been fainting. I've talked to doctors there, and the conditions are just deplorable. And they don't have, they're running out of formula for babies. And so I don't see any good way of resolving this crisis without a ceasefire. We, we're perhaps close to a ceasefire, but we've been close to a ceasefire, it has sometimes seemed, for a year. And so it's hard to know where this goes. It is good to see the international pressure um, on Israel, and including from so many Israelis themselves. There really has been a rising up of the Israeli population who are deeply concerned about what is being done in their name to the children in Gaza. And UNICEF reports that 80% of the deaths by starvation in Gaza are of children.
And I understand that 70%, I could have this statistic wrong, of Israelis oppose what's happening in Gaza. Is that accurate, Nick?
That's roughly right. But I think that there is some ambivalence within the Israeli population. And um, certainly within Israel, many people are still traumatized by October 7th. They would like to see the end of Hamas. But
They'd like to
there
see the
is
hostages released?
they would like to see the hostages released, and I think there is increasingly a sense, which seems utterly correct to me, that Netanyahu is playing this for his own political benefit and not for the benefit of Israel. And that right now, Israel's interests and those of Palestinians are aligned in ending the war, in bringing the hostages back, in creating a ceasefire, allowing people to be fed, and, hopefully moving toward a two-state solution. Because it's also worth noting, Katie, that while all eyes are focused on Gaza, meanwhile, in the West Bank, the Palestinians there are also suffering really a pretty brutal oppression and what human rights organizations, even in Israel, have been calling the Gazification of the West Bank. So this situation just cries out for a broader approach, and I don't see much of an alternative other than a two-state solution.
I know France is becoming very active in negotiations, and I want to end this part of our conversation by asking you. You were saying that the U.S. is complicit. There starts Marjorie Taylor Greene, interestingly, of all people, became the first Republican lawmaker to call the crisis a genocide, and even President Trump broke with Netanyahu's claim that there's no starvation in the region. So what do you see as the potential change in U.S. Israel policy that could put some pressure on Israel to come up with some kind of solution to either have that ceasefire, get more food aid into the country? What can the U.S. do?
So the U.S. has enormous leverage, and we haven't used it. When Biden was president, Democrats tended to defer to him, and Biden was unwilling to condition arms transfers to Israel, which is, some of the most important leverage we have. Unwilling to condition diplomatic support to Israel, which is another important area of leverage. And the upshot is that Netanyahu rolled all over Biden. I think that now that Biden is out of office, Democrats feel more free to criticize that policy. And now we are indeed seeing more Democrats calling for conditioning arms transfers. And it is interesting what we're seeing in the Republican ranks as well. Um, I guess I would be surprised if there is a sudden change in this. But if I were an Israeli policymaker, I'd be deeply concerned about the shift in attitudes happening in America, especially among young people. There's this huge generational divide, as you know, with young people, both Democrats and Republicans, just much more, just aghast at what is being done with our support in terms of starving people, denying them rights. And yes, what happened on October 7th was horrific. There are terrible things happening in other places of the world that also need attention. But that does not excuse us from providing weapons to support the starvation and dispossession of a people.
Let me move on, if I could, Nick, to talk about USAID, what I originally had reached out to you. You wrote a piece for the Times earlier this month about the ramifications of the dismantling of USAID, and it was actually so disturbing. You went to West Africa earlier this summer to report on some of the changes that have occurred since the agency was shut down. Can you tell us what you witnessed?
Yeah. Sure, USAID had its flaws, but it was saving more than 3 million lives a year. And what we've seen since then is kids dying, moms dying. Uh, you know, in one country, I came across the family of a 5-year-old boy who he had HIV and he was dependent on ARVs provided by a social worker paid by USAID. Now, the cost of that AIDS medication was 12 cents a day. Um, Without that social worker, how was this 5-year-old boy, this AIDS orphan, going to get his medication? And he couldn't. And so he got an opportunistic infection and he died. His name was Evan Unzo. Then, you know, a mom in childbirth, a mother of two in Liberia. Maternal mortality is a big problem there, so the U.S. had funded ambulances in that area. And so when she got an obstructed labor in April, the family called the ambulance to get her to the hospital so she could get a C-section. And the U.S. had left the ambulance there, but it had stopped providing the fuel for the ambulance. And this was done so suddenly that there was no new mechanism to provide fuel. And the ambulance driver said, well, if you bring fuel, we can send the ambulance. And of course, they couldn't do that. And so 10 strong young men from the village wrapped her in a hammock and put her on their shoulders and ran down this mud path 10 miles toward the hospital. But they didn't get her there in time, and she died. She bled to death as they were going down that mountainside, for lack of some arrangement for fuel. And Katie, you just see this in village after village, people dying unnecessarily for lack of, $10 worth of malaria medicine, kids starving to death because they can't get this cheap peanut paste, which is the U.S. has already purchased, and 678,000 boxes of it are sitting in warehouses in Rhode Island and Georgia. And the U.S. is even paying storage costs for it in the U.S., but is unwilling to actually ship it to
Why?
places where it's needed. I think it's mostly just chaos and not knowing what to do and everybody being fired. Kind of ineptitude. But at this point, the ineptitude is so serious and widespread that at some point, the recklessness of it just, verges into cruelty. And, we're also seeing, food being destroyed. The Atlantic had a great piece
Right.
about,
I wanted to ask you about that just to remind people. That got a lot of attention. Thank goodness I shared that article. And we learned that the Trump administration incinerated 500 tons of emergency food aid. I think it had been allowed to expire. It was at a warehouse, I believe. Was it in Dubai? I can't remember.
Dubai. Yeah.
In Dubai. And these were these kind of hyper nutritious biscuits that would have saved so many lives. And they were meant for, I believe, Afghanistan and Iraq, but they could have fed children in Gaza, like all the children in Gaza for a week, I think this article said. Um, I just, is
There-
it
You know, my sense is that there's actually a fair amount of that. Food rotting in warehouses. The U.S. is now apparently destroying $9 million worth of contraceptives. Rather than give them out to people or let some other nonprofit take them. And the result will be more unwanted pregnancies and more moms dying in childbirth unnecessarily. In Sierra Leone, I visited a warehouse where there were 7 million doses of a drug Mectizan that prevents river blindness, which is a horrendous cause of blindness in West
and I
Africa.
think, wasn't that the Carter Center? Didn't Jimmy Carter do so much with that?
He did. Jimmy Carter was heroic, and Merck, the company Merck, donated these drugs and shipped them to West Africa. But Carter and Merck both, they deserve kudos. And so in this case, the warehouse was full of 7.6 million doses that Merck had donated free, that had shipped to this warehouse, and the U.S. was supposed to pay just for the administration of the drugs, but then just stop doing it. And so some of the first group of drugs actually expired next month. And so now they're frantic efforts to try to find other people to try to pay for it. But meanwhile, you know, here, here is this incredibly effective program preventing blindness, letting people become more capable and, look after themselves, look after their children. $1 of that program leverages $26 of donated drugs. And yet the administration just dropped the ball because this was done so suddenly, so recklessly, without thought. I mean, when I saw that warehouse, I thought waste, fraud, and abuse. Yes, now I'm seeing it. That's the waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's going to cause not just loss of money, but loss of human lives.
And for people, you wrote in your piece, you talked about aid as foreign policy. We've heard a lot about soft power, about the United States' role in the world, about caring about starving children and trying to help people, which I think makes me so proud as an American to see that we are that country and those people, or at least we were. And you wrote rather, some folks are probably thinking it's too bad about what is happening, but this isn't my problem. And I guess to them, I'd say that the US has values at stake, but we also have interests at stake. And with this gap, China is stepping in to win friends and influence around the world. So, it's one thing to just do the right thing. But in this case, this kind of aid is doing the smart thing as well.
Totally. And, Marco Rubio was a big champion of humanitarian aid when he was in the Senate for precisely that reason, that we advance American security interests, partly with aircraft carriers, but also partly with humanitarian aid. And, there is kind of a modern scramble for Africa now between the West and China. China is building all kinds of infrastructure projects because it wants bases, it wants support at the UN. Um, and, you know, one in South Sudan, I visited a little village where historically there had been no maternal health care and women died one after the other in childbirth. And I went and visited a clinic funded by the US through the UN Population Fund. And it was the first maternal care in that area. And when people saw, this white guy asking about the clinic, they sort of assumed that somehow I was responsible. I was the American who somehow was paying for it. And the village elders came up and thanked me and said, women aren't dying here anymore. Not one woman had died since that clinic had established. Not one newborn had died. Um, and a woman who was then delivering her baby, then in labor, she wanted to name her baby after me as gratitude to America. And then what they didn't know, what I had to tell them, was that because of the USAID shutdown, that clinic was actually about to close, and women again were about to bleed to death in the dust there. And it's just maddening when this happens by, folks sitting in the White House without any knowledge of conditions in the field in ways that undermine our values and our interests alike.
And, I just want to mention, I think you mentioned it briefly, that, you know, they're destroying $9.7 million worth of USAID purchased contraceptives. Uh, I, I mean, help us understand what in the hell is going on with that as well. Is this because the administration doesn't believe in contraceptives, or they just, you know, deciding that they just don't want to help anyone with anything that's outside the borders of the United States?
So I think that there is generally a deep suspicion of aid and a particularly strong suspicion of anything having to do with reproductive health, which is kind of a term that you can't really use anymore in the U.S. government. And um, you know, officials say, well, let them buy their own condoms or whatever it may be. Um, and over time, one can build toward greater capacity to do that. But contraception, I mean, there are 300 million women in the world who who don't want to get pregnant but don't have access to modern contraception. And we can inexpensively help them and support them in ways that will also enable them um, to work, to advance agriculture, to look after their children better, to help their countries, to control HIV/AIDS, and so these are things that seem so inexpensive, so fundamental to our kind of moral obligations to fellow humans. And the idea that you would not just stop a program, but actually destroy contraceptives that you've purchased, it's grotesque, Katie. It's grotesque.
Nick, I'm so grateful to you for traveling to these places, for having, being on the ground and for reporting on these critically important stories that people need to be aware of and really showing the human impact of US policy under this administration. And I'm such an admirer of yours, Nick, and thank you for doing this. I'm going to be talking to Susan Glasser from the New Yorker next and wrapping up this show, but I'm really, really grateful to you. You're a real hero, Nick.
Oh, not at all, but thanks. And Susan's great. So
I'll
have a
tell
great
you.
chat with her.
Hi. Okay,
I'll
thanks
do
so
that.
much.
See
All
ya.
right,
Take care.
bye. Bye. Okay, now we're going to go to Susan, everyone, and wrap up this Substack Live. Tell me how you feel about these conversations, if they're helpful to you all, if it's, um, if you appreciate them. We have a whole team that helps me with this at our media company. Oh my goodness, there's so many Susan Glassers. Oh, there's Susan Glasser. Hold on. 3, 3, 2, 4. Here you are, Susan. Okay. And again, I have so much admiration for Susan and her reporting for the New Yorker. She's based in Washington. And here she is. Susan, thank you. I was just talking to Nick Kristof about not only what's happening in Gaza, but the impact that the dismantling of USAID has had on all around the world. And he said to tell you hi and is a big fan of yours. You guys must know each other well at this point. But we're going to just turn to what you've been talking about this week in Washington, Susan. Your recent piece in the New Yorker, you write that, quote, the word scandal has lost its meaning under Donald Trump. Uh, Having said that, you do believe this Epstein story is different. How so?
Well, thanks, Katie. And yes, I am a super fan of Nick's, and he's done so much important reporting on, pointing out that the Trump effect is not just here in Washington or even around the U.S., but it's a global catastrophe in some ways, and not just the abrupt shutdown of USAID, but I think we'll all be feeling the ripple effects of this for many years to come. It's bad news for the world, and in that context, right, what is a scandal anymore? Is it a scandal when you abruptly cut off food aid to children who are going to die as a result of it? As Nick has documented, that's not just hyperbole. It's not just, is it a scandal that Jeffrey Epstein, on some level, 6 years dead? We already knew that Donald Trump and he were friends. Millions of Americans chose to overlook that fact and vote for Donald Trump anyways. Again in 2024. And so, you know, on the one hand, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that this is the thing of all things, right? It's not the private scandal of Donald Trump, of course, but the public scandal in many ways that, that we should be talking about. So, I have this deep reluctance. It's also a terrible story, frankly, about terrible people. Donald Trump, it's grotesque daily, right? To see him traveling around the world to Scotland as he was the last few days, and you know commingling the affairs of this country and the world with this sort of grotesque commentary about young women who worked for him at his spa in Mar-a-Lago, and he was really mad at Jeffrey Epstein, not for being a disgusting sexual predator, but for stealing his employee. I mean, so I forgive me for my ambivalence in even asking this, but I just think it must be said, what a sort of horrific story this is. But to your question, and I think it is a legitimate and important question, politics, right? Politics is the answer, and Donald Trump has cared only about the support of his fervent Republican base in many ways over the last 10 years. And it is revealing that this is the thing that they have been told to expect, the revelation of the conspiracy theory between celebrities and Democrats and this sex offender. And they're more attached to that, at least in the short term, than to their loyalty to Trump. And so, I think that's notable. And it tells us something about the politics of that MAGA base that I think is relevant to what's happening now in Washington and going forward, what the future of this MAGA movement is, with or without Trump.
People keep talking, Susan, about MAGA's uh, attachment to conspiracy theories. But I'm embarrassed to say I'm trying to figure out what this conspiracy theory is exactly. What is conspiratorial about the disgusting things that Jeffrey Epstein and his cohort, and his enabler in chief, uh, Ghislaine Maxwell? I mean, what is the conspiracy?
I appreciate you asking that, Katie. And I also asked that question because, it's not a case that you and I are expert in. Um, I was on a show actually with Bill Crystal, and he had a very good answer to that question. He said, "Listen, it's important to note that it is not a conspiracy theory. It is actually true that Jeffrey Epstein was friends with many rich and powerful people who included not only Donald Trump, but many bold-faced name celebrities, including Democrats among them. That's not a scandal. That's a fact. It's a disgusting fact, but it's a fact. It won't be a shock, sadly, to anyone who, listens to this conversation to know that, the Department of Men Are Pigs is a big department. It includes Democrats, Republicans, celebrities. That's not a conspiracy in the sense that we already knew that. I think the specific conspiracy that we're talking about right here involves two things. Partially it's a conspiracy, allegedly. Partially, it's a cover up that may be a real cover up. The alleged conspiracy theory is that many of Trump's senior appointees and MAGA figures like Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, the number one and number two at the FBI, have dangled out the possibility that when they took power, they would be releasing new revelations from the secret FBI files and the secret Justice Department files that would sort of explore an even deeper conspiracy among Jeffrey Epstein and all these nefarious celebrities and Democrats. So, number one, that's the conspiracy theory as I understand it, which is just the idea that they've dangled the prospect of revelations that they would be forthcoming once they took power. That's number one. Number two, now we're in the scandal phase, and like all scandal phases in Washington, it tends to be how you respond to allegations and the cover up that often ensues that keeps the story going. And I think that Donald Trump and his loyalty obsessed minions have definitely created a lot of smoke with how they've handled this, because the Wall Street Journal, among other publications, the New York Times as well, have reported in recent days, and this is very significant, and I do not discount its significance. The Wall Street Journal and the Times confirmed have reported that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, actually informed Donald Trump in May that his name was mentioned multiple times in these Epstein files possessed by the Justice Department. And this was after a huge number of federal government employees were tasked with going through these files and preparing them for release. So it leads to some obvious questions for us all to ask, which is, were you preparing to release these documents until Donald Trump found out his name was in them? Did he personally order you not to release these documents? Donald Trump, we already know, lied to the public about this because he was asked on July 15th, was your name in these files? Were you told this by the Attorney General? No, he said. When in fact the answer, according to this reporting, was yes, yes. And so that's the cover up. So we have a cover up, we have a conspiracy, and we have the known facts, which aren't sadly a conspiracy, but just facts on the public record about Jeffrey Epstein's dealings with many powerful men in our country.
Well, I just think it's so perplexing that the Trump administration, whether it's Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, Stephen Miller, whoever's running the country, that they actually thought if they were like, oh, there's no there, we're not going to release this, even though they had talked about it, even though he had mentioned it in the campaign, even though Pam Bondi said on Fox News, it's waiting for my review. Um, how could they be so stupid to think that, oh, we'll just say there was no there, we're not releasing it, and people were going to move on and talk about how great his big, beautiful bill was?
Good question, Katie. I mean, my take, and I'd be interested in yours. My take is that this is revealing about what Donald Trump thinks about his base, which is that they will go along with what he has to say, no matter how inane and stupid or implausible it is, no matter how blatant it appears that he's lying to them. And by the way, Trump has some basis for thinking this about his followers because he's been telling them a series of absurd lies over the last decade, and they've followed him. You know, what is his talk of the rigged election of 2020 but an absurd lie? It is not plausible. There's no
Yeah,
basis for understanding. So Donald Trump thinks these people will follow me even into, the hall of mirrors that I create on any given day. And I think it's revealing about Trump and his attitude of actual disdain toward his own base, and that's
but
part of
he's
what's happening.
also, I was just going to add, Susan, as you know, he's got his, propaganda arm, Fox News, basically framing news events to, with his approval. They have stopped talking about Epstein because he's asked them not to. They have, basically shape shifted their coverage to enable Trump to spread disinformation and lies to his loyal base. So I remember when the stock market was crashing, they got rid of the ticker on Fox News. They're not talking about Epstein on Fox News. They basically are just, as I said, his communications arm. And so people who listen to the number one cable network are getting, a view of reality that isn't really accurate. So you can understand why people are getting this very myopic and pro-Trump news diet, and that's, but this thing has really broken through. And it's interesting that this is the thing that may, I don't know, not dismantle MAGA, but fray it in some ways. And why do you think this is the story? And who knows if it is? And we were saying earlier, like, who knows if this will be the straw that breaks MAGA's back? But it is interesting that this one, even though they're not hearing about it on Fox News, is something that just won't go away.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with everything, except I would, sort of add an asterisk, a note of caution, because I think that I don't see any evidence that this will be the straw that broke MAGA's back. In fact, they have disagreed with each other over various issues and over the last decade. And, when faced with a choice, in the end between Trump and some other figure, whether within their own party or, heaven forbid, the Democratic Party, these folks have tended to come back to Trump even where they disagree with him. So that's I think that's very important to point out to people. I think it very unreasonable expectation if they can go along ultimately in the end with Trump on something like January 6th, where
Right. I
he
was say
literally
that.
like, don't believe your own lying eyes. Remember that even many, almost all Republicans as well as Democrats thought Trump had gone too far. Trump himself thought he had gone too far. He knew he was in big trouble. And
Lindsey Graham and all these Republicans were
I'm done.
outraged. That
That's
that
what
turned
Lindsey Graham
around
said. Exactly. So I just want to put the asterisk, like,
yeah.
let's temper our expectations here. Number one. Number two, I do think that your observation is so important, though, about the fever swamp of lies and conspiracy theories and misinformation in which this sort of hardcore MAGA base has been marinating. And nothing has proven to be more resonant for these folks than throwing the labels, bless you,
Thank you.
of pedophile and sex offender. I mean, this is like, their favorite label. I mean, they've been, smearing people with allegations like this in a sort of QAnon adjacent way for
Right,
years.
the whole Pizzagate thing, this is sort of reminiscent
Exactly.
of that.
Yeah, there's a like a sexual panic that seems to be, one of the most reliable undercurrents that's often invoked by the propagandists of MAGA media. And of course, the other thing that's happened over the last 10 years is that while Fox is the largest network for the pro-Trump, very large part of this country, there are many new MAGA outlets that are much more niche, a whole ecosystem of far right media that didn't really exist at the start of the Trump era, and many of those may be more willing to fuel this than the Fox itself, which is more responsive to Trump's demands.
Right, that's so true. In fact, before when I was talking to Liz Oyer, who is the head pardons attorney at the DOJ, I'm sure you know her story. She didn't give Mel Gibson restore his gun rights because of his history of domestic violence, and she was, fired pretty quickly after that. But she was saying the same thing. I was talking to her about some of these far right podcasters and part of the manosphere, and they seem to be, even Joe Rogan, criticizing Trump on the Epstein front. So I think we're seeing some fracturing in the MAGA base. Before we go, I wanted to ask you about Mike Johnson. I mean, that was sort of a weird move. He didn't want anybody to vote on this, so he basically said, have a good summer, everybody. You're now the recess has begun." What is really going on Capitol Hill? You live in D.C. I mean, was this basically just hoping Mike Johnson hoping it would go away?
Absolutely. I mean, there was a classic comment by a senator from Oklahoma, Marquayne Mullen, who, they were having the same kind of tactics by Democrats in the Senate as in the House, but they have different rules there, so they couldn't just adjourn the Senate. But basically, Democrats are trying to force the Republicans into taking uncomfortable votes to release the Epstein documents. And Mullen said on the Senate floor, "Oh yeah, we're just running cover here for Donald Trump," which is talk about saying the quiet part out loud. I think that's, sometimes the thing is the thing. And Mike Johnson's effort to shut down the House and put them into recess early, yeah, I think it was exactly what it seemed. Now, interestingly, a week earlier, Johnson had a rare moment of, call it candor or, breaking with Trump where he said, "Oh, yeah, they should release it all." And he changed his tune pretty quickly. And of course, it's not hard to understand the reason why. The reason why is that Mike Johnson owes his job to Donald Trump. He's not the Speaker of the House. If Donald Trump tomorrow says, "Get rid of Mike Johnson," he's gone. They have a super small, very fractious majority in the House of Representatives. It's essentially almost an ungovernable majority in the House of Representatives. And that has given Trump enormous power over the Republican conference in the House today. And that's part of, I think, the dysfunction, broadly speaking, of our system right now. We do not have independent branches of government acting as mutual checks upon each other in the way that the Constitution envisioned. And for my money, the thing that really just blows me away, to pull out of this ridiculous, sordid, awful scandal for a second here, is like, since Trump came back to power on January 20th, we're living in a world where Congress has essentially unilaterally ceded its rights to the executive branch, to the president. Donald Trump is shutting down duly authorized, duly appropriated, and funded agencies of the executive branch. And Congress isn't saying a damn word. And that's just not how our system is supposed to work. Things that were voted and approved by huge bipartisan majorities in the Senate and the House, even that they're letting Donald Trump, take a meat grinder too and not saying a word. And that's just, a broken moment in Washington where Trump has a degree of power and authority right now that he's exercising in an unchecked way by a far right Supreme Court and a far right Congress, in a way that nobody ever envisioned.
Yeah, you're right. So much for checks and balances. And MC, whoever that is, high MC who's watching, said, what about the Supreme Court? They're supposed to be a safeguard, but, early on, they granted him immunity. So it's sort of like talk about handing him more power on a silver platter. Basically, they cleared the field for him, didn't they?
That's my view. John Roberts, he projects as a very kind of mild mannered institutionalist, somebody who temperamentally almost the exact opposite of Donald Trump. And yet, rather than being a conservative small c, if you look at the impact of what John Roberts has done on this court, you could call him a radical with a capital R, it seems to me. And one of the most radical decisions that the Roberts Supreme Court has made was that presidential immunity decision that came in the middle of the 2024 campaign. And I'm so glad that you brought it up because I think that as much as anything is a moment that was sort of architecting a new world in which a president is not the president of our lifetimes, but a president with extraordinary, unchecked, unaccountable power in a way that I certainly never envisioned was possible. And they helped bring Donald Trump back to power with that decision number one, and then once he was in power, they helped him to decide to pursue it in a maximalist way.
I know you have to go. I have to go too. But you know, I just want to end by asking you what I was talking to Liz Oyer about, Susan, was this like strange meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell and the Assistant Attorney General Todd Blanche going to Tallahassee, spending 2 days with her. Now I didn't realize, Liz told me that her new lawyer is a friend of Todd Blanche. And so they're obviously in cahoots and trying to negotiate some kind of deal. I mean, it is so insane. I can't even believe I'm saying this, but if this comes to pass, I mean, meanwhile, he's doing everything in his power to distract from this story. The insane AI video of President Obama being carted away from the Oval Office in handcuffs. I mean, this whole accusation of treason. I mean, I do feel like I am living in, I don't know, La Land. I just don't even understand it. But if Ghislaine is granted, like, is pardoned by Donald Trump, and she lies and says Donald Trump really didn't know, and like he came to a party twice, but we really didn't. He didn't spend much time with Jeffrey Epstein. Like, can they do that?
I mean, look, you've already gotten an informed lawyer's perspective on that. Sort of the
But politically,
right,
but
the shocked citizen, the shocked analyst perspective on that is, what if Richard Nixon did the whole damn Watergate cover up live on, Twitter and True Social? That's what we're seeing here. Nixon tried to cover it up. He was doing it in secret. Donald Trump and his team are doing this in full view, and it's the flagrancy, the brazenness of their actions suggests A, that they believe that there are no meaningful checks and watchdogs on their power. B, it suggests that, the sort of disdain with which they hold their base. And C, and most importantly, seems to me they think they're going to get away with it. Although, again, people, when caught up in scandal, do tend to make mistakes. And that is a very long and well established Washington story. So at least we can maybe take a little comfort in this, in the idea that people who are in panic mode overreach. But it for me, it is the brazenness of what they're trying to do right now that really sticks out. And it's interesting that some Democrats have held their nose and sort of don't want to talk about it, but others are just jumping right in here. And Dick Durbin, who's the top Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, has been quite aggressive, and he's actually managed to put some facts on the record here as this horrible story has unfolded. And you know, again, we're not lawyers, you and I, Katie, but it is amazing. We have been around long enough to know that you don't send the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, who, by the way, also happens to be your former personal lawyer, in and of itself a grotesque violation of our post-Watergate norms of independent Justice Department, right? The last time this happened was John Mitchell and Richard Nixon, and they sent John Mitchell to jail because he was a crook, okay? And that's why we don't do that anymore. So you appoint your personal attorney, to be the deputy attorney general, and then you send him down to do the job that no prosecutor, never mind the deputy attorney general, but what I'm told by lawyers who understand the Justice Department is that even a prosecutor wouldn't go by himself to have this kind of interview with Ghislaine Maxwell, because for all the reasons you can imagine, they would want an FBI investigator type more to sit down and do this. And this kind of testimony might not hold up in court. And, also, by the way, this has already been investigated. What new thing are you going to come up with? She's an obviously interested party who's in search of a pardon. Her lawyer has gone public and made that clear. That's what they're negotiating over. So, I find it brazen, appalling, but sadly, not even shocking at this point. What's shocking in Trump world? What's the scandal, as we started out this with?
Which is what your latest article in the New Yorker. If you all don't follow Susan, she's one of the smartest people I know. So thoughtful. Please, read her pieces. She works super hard and is always so insightful. Hey, Susan, thank you. This was an hour and a half. I just did an hour and a half live Substack, and
You're amazing.
well, no, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying it went by so quickly. Susan, it's always great to see you, and to everyone who's joined us for these conversations. I really appreciate it. Please let us know other things you want to hear. I'm so lucky to have access to really smart people like Susan and Nick Kristof and Liz Oyer. So if you want to continue these conversations, please let us know. And a big thank you to my team who helps book this and helps produce it. So, Susan, give my love to Peter. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon, I hope.
For sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.